Ho, 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 and welcome to our Christmas edition of Green Signals with me, Nigel Harris, and chuckling in the background because I heard him.
Me, Richard Bowker, from the very last time from Derbyshire.
Jolly good. Well, it does look a bit like you've got stuff stacked up behind you, Richard, ready to throw into a... That's a big mirror. I wouldn't like to be moving that one myself.
Yeah, I suspect you can't see that on the edited shot, but there is an enormous mirror right next to me. It's quite remarkable. So there you go. I won't show you the rest of the house. You wouldn't quite believe it. So.
Well, look, seriously, I mean, I can't imagine many things worse than having to move just before Christmas. So I'm sure Steph joins me in giving you and Madeline and the kids our best wishes and that hope that there's no sparks are struck that cause any conflagrations during this very stressing time.
No. Totally chilled.
Well, that's good to hear. Anyway, let's get on with it. We had a wonderful response, as is usual, and we're delighted about that, so keep them coming, to our last episode, which featured our first outside broadcast with Richard attending Siemens Mobility's Clapham 35 event in Chippenham. And a jolly good job he did too. We also had some lovely comments regarding our first special podcast, which was our obituary and tribute for one-time shedmaster at King's Cross Top Shed, Peter Townend, a true elder statesman of the railways, who sadly passed away at the age of 98 recently. Now, in 2024, which is right around the corner now, we'll be doing more video specials. Richard and I have loads of ideas planned, so do stick with us and watch this space. And if when you've seen them, you've got any ideas that you think we should follow up, as usual, let us know. And I also have to say, looking at the picture, it's good to see Richard, who is a real Ebenezer Scrooge about Christmas, trying to be a little more festive. And I know I've got room to talk because there's not a bit of tinsel to be seen here, but well done, Richard. The tinsel suits you.
I thought I'd push the boat out a long way.
Well, not that far as it happens. Anyway, let's dive. Do you wear paper hats at Christmas, Richard?
For the kids, yeah.
For the kids, do you?
Yeah.
Maybe Madeline could do a bit of a selfie of the pair of you, and we can share that with our own. I don't see that seems to that's not landed that well. So we asked you to send in your questions on just about anything, which was something that caused us some trepidation, wondering what might come. And we've had a really good selection of policy, practical, engineering, operational, all sorts of stuff. So, we've no real plan for what follows now. We're going to bat them back and forth and just answer them off the tops of our heads. So, Richard, are you ready to give this a go with no safety net? It's either going to go really well or it's not.
I agree. Let's give it a go.
Okay, here goes. Question 1. First question is from Peter Cummins, and it's this. It's a big one, so you're going to kick it off, Richard. It's, was privatisation a total disaster?
Look, that's a good question. It is a big one. It's a very fair question as well, because you look at what's happening at the moment and you kind of sort of scratch your head. I mean, in a word, no, I don't think it was a total disaster. And I'll tell you why I think it wasn't. I think there was a period of time when, because of that sort of blossoming, I suppose, of just can do, let's do things that haven't been done before. It was a very revenue growth driven mindset. Really was. And it was all about getting a bigger railway with more people. Didn't get everything right. I mean, far from it. But it was very much about growth and revenue. And so for that reason alone, I don't think it was a disaster. I think there were so many things that came out of privatisation that we kind of now take for granted, but we probably wouldn't have had any other way. I mean, and there are so many success stories and there are so many positive things. Was it done in the best way it could have been? Well, clearly not. And I think, hindsight's wonderful. And some will say they said it at the time, right? And I've got some sympathy with that. But there are some that are very ideologically pure about this. And I think that's a mistake. I think there were some terrific things that came out of privatisation, and had we not done it, I think we'd have been in a worse state.
I think I'd agree with most of that. There were some things which did go wrong, but those of us who were around in the first few years will remember that can-do attitude you talked about. I remember seeing, being really rather excited when Richard Brown was at Midland Main Line, which I think was National Express at the time. And they launched a ticket called Foresight, I think, which at the time was 4 people to London from the East Midlands for 30 quid. And that struck me at the time. That was about the price of a tank of petrol. I thought, that's a railway finally acknowledging where its prime competition lies and trying to do something about it. There were things went wrong, and the railway got plenty of things wrong. But the growth is interesting, isn't it? On the last day of BR, there were 800 million passengers. Before COVID, it had got to 1.7 billion. Now, there was a fashionable argument. I remember my dear friend Christian Woolmar used to repeat this frequently. Oh, it's all tied to GDP. If GDP goes up.
No.
Well, actually, the financial crisis gave the lie to that, because the growth that we'd come to see of about 6% a year continued, barely blipped through the financial crisis, which finally killed that argument off.
Yeah.
The big thing I think that did go wrong, and 6 of one and a half a dozen other the industry and politicians to blame for this, is we never found the sweet spot where the government came up with operating system, franchises or whatever contracts you want to have, which gave the operating private community a reasonable but not excessive living, an income and a profit. It meant the government got the railway at less than it would have cost to run it itself, and the passengers got a superb railway. If we could have found that magic triangle, but for one reason or another, it was out of balance and we never properly found it. And it's been ultimately wrecked now by politicians, I think, and the situation we're in now. But was it a total disaster? No, it wasn't. I remember Dick Fern, who many people will know, career railwayman, who worked for Railtrack for a while after privatisation and then went off to run the Irish Railways for 10 years.
Yeah.
And when Dick came back, we recruited him as a National Rail Awards judge. And I remember one vivid conversation with Dick where he said, Nigel, the thing I've noticed most is the improvement in the quality of station stock. He said stations like Southampton or Doncaster, which BR would have taken the roof off and just reduced and simplified, have been invested in and made look good. And I think that's one of the things that you said about we take for granted now, that our stations are pretty decent. They weren't. You frequently see pictures on Twitter with people enthusing about Deltics at Doncaster. And I often say, yeah, but look at the state of the station behind it.
Isn't it just, it's true of the human condition, isn't it, that we tend to gloss over the bad bits of history and we kind of remember the things that made us happy and we look at it through rose-tinted spectacles. And that's we do that in everything. I mean, I think it's one of our coping strategies as people. And I think we kind of tend to do that with the railways pre-privatisation. There was an awful lot that wasn't very good. But, it goes through cycles, and I've no doubt that, when I'm in my very final years, we'll have gone through another cycle of something else. So I think that's how it is.
Let's hope this cycle comes to an end fairly soon and we manage to improve things. Okie dokie. Right, question 2. You're going to handle this one, Richard, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yes, I thought you were going to introduce the question. Oh, charming. No. Yeah. Okay.
Pay attention.
Yeah. Okay. Right. No, keep up, Richard. Right. From Jonathan Dart. What might the impact of AI or artificial intelligence be on the rail industry? Well, the glib answer is I have absolutely no idea.
And neither does anybody else.
No, but I think there are some signs. So, I'm not an AI expert because I'm kind of over 25 now. And so that kind of rules me out. But I have read around quite a bit. There's it's the pace of change that is absolutely remarkable, and the pace of development. So I think with where you are interrogating data, where you are doing tasks that can be automated with machine learning or whatever it is, and particularly where, I suppose there'll be some far cleverer people perhaps listening than me who know this stuff. I think coupled with, say, quantum computing and the ability to process data a lot faster. So things that are still quite laborious to do on the railway, whether it's, I don't know whether it's even signalling or operational systems or so on, timetabling, ticketing maybe. I think those things could actually have be dramatically impacted. I don't know whether this is just an older person's view on the world, though. I still think that things like the railway, and it's true of other sectors as well, I'm not just saying this is just a railway thing, that human interaction is so important. Agreed. And I don't see that disappearing. And were it to start to, I think that would be a big mistake. And we've kind of seen it, haven't we, with the recent ticket offices debacle. When you assume that systems and IT will solve all your issues, you make a mistake. And I think AI is a bit like that. But the exciting thing, and arguably the terrifying thing about AI, is that I don't think anybody really knows where the next 6 months, 12 months, 2 years is. The trick will be to keep on top of it and see, and constantly sort of challenge it and see whether it can benefit the railway.
Because I think the genuinely scary thing is even the people who are developing it are worried about it, aren't they? We've seen some very big names saying, "Look, we just need to be a bit careful about this." The idea of the machines taking over. Sorry, Dave, I cannot do that. For those who will remember.
Yes.
So there's certainly that, but basically we don't know.
We don't. But it's exciting and scary in equal measure, which is true of lots of things, really.
It absolutely is.
All right, moving on.
And it's you again.
Is it my job? See,
you're not looking at the plan, Richard.
No. Well, you said there wasn't a plan.
Well, there is a plan, but there's a bit of guidance. Otherwise, you or me would talk all the time.
Oh, all right then. Right. Well, in which case, here we go. So actually, I thought this was I like this question. So Helen Baker asked, in the last 30 years, so I guess really since privatisation, isn't it, if you think about it? I know it was kind of 97 when it was done, but it was mooted around 93. So, yeah, okay. In the last 30 years, who would you say has made the greatest contribution to the railway? You're going to go.
I suppose you're expecting me to say you, Richard, or...
No, I'm absolutely not.
During your years at the SRA.
I wouldn't agree with you if you said it, no.
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because there's always going to be a number of names that spring to mind. I mean, I'll have a stab at maybe a top three, which might get revised as I'm talking about them or in response to what you say. But, I mean, a top three might include, and this is not a cop-out, a bit of a joint nomination for Sir Pete Henry and Andrew Haines for sustained contributions in various guises over many years in different organisations. I think if you were to look at the balance sheet in time to come, that would weigh quite heavily. There are legends like Chris Green, who went to Scotland and pretended the BRB didn't exist and opened stations and railways and did his own thing. He was the master of seeking forgiveness after rather than permission before, which sometimes is a good thing. And I reckon there'd be a good case for the late Adrian Shooter, who didn't get it all right by any means, but he did show what could be done when you motivated people, got a good team, got aligned objectives, and just went at it, determined that you were going to succeed. And although they were expensive and not without problems, the sort of doubling up of the Chiltern route in its various evergreen phases, I think there were three, really showed that. I mean, I remember at one point they were having trouble at a weekend with EWS drivers on the engineers train. So Adrian just trained his own drivers to drive 66s. He was pretty unstoppable. So maybe the answer is people of that mindset, because you could also include people like Christopher Garnett, who in the early years set a standard with Great North Eastern Railway, which just showed what could be done in terms of a flagship railway company.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to have Christopher Garnett in my three if we were going to go for three. We were terribly competitive. I mean, bearing in mind I was at Virgin at the time, and it was quite competitive, you know. and he's also an awful lot posher than I am. However, what I really liked about him was he sort of brought back that sort of sense of elegance and quality, and managed to get a nice balance between harking back to some of the best bits of the past, but without being a slave to it. You know, it was quite. I do think. I know also he put up with Jim Sherwood as his owner, so he gets a medal for that. But he was no. I think Christopher Garnett would be one. I would probably have Chris Green in my list. I mean, Chris was an extraordinary guy. I was his chairman for, I suppose, a couple of years, almost, not quite. And the thing with Chris is you absolutely couldn't let him have the checkbook, right? But we had a fantastic sort of partnership, really. I have never seen anybody before or since who could motivate, engage, excite a group of staff like he could when the chips were down. I mean, it was just absolutely remarkable. So, yeah, for all that he did over a number of years, he'd be in my list. I'm gonna add one. I'm gonna throw you a left field one in.
Okay.
But I was just thinking of one of the sort of people who was one of not the architects, but one of the movers behind sort of the whole how to take advantage and develop things during privatisation. And I would actually say Brian Souter. And there will be some railway people who will go, ooh, you know, busman, which would be appallingly wrong, actually. It was Brian who stuck a couple of coaches on a Scottish service to London, if you remember, on an overnight,
yes.
when absolutely, that was pre-privatisation. And if I had the privilege of working with Brian for a few years, and I don't know anybody with more. You sometimes had to kind of clean up the mess behind, but that's the that's the mark, I suppose, of a great entrepreneur, really. But you know, talk about 50 ideas before breakfast, and then another 50 before lunch. Just can do, get it done, make it happen. And there's plenty of others like it, but Brian, because I worked, I suppose, relatively closely with him, I would say Brian Souter.
Bit surprised you didn't put Branson in there, Richard.
Yeah, the problem is I think everybody would probably expect me to say Richard, and he was fantastic. And but whereas Richard, Richard was incredible. I mean, he's incredible. I think Brian had that incredible balance of actually entrepreneurial daring do. Yeah. But he actually he really was quite a detailed guy. Operationally, he was quite savvy. He knew he kind of knew it top to bottom, really. And I think that was his bus background, really. And I suppose that made him quite the complete person. But no, I mean, look, Richard Branson, I mean, yeah, phenomenal what he did. And they were an amazing double act, by the way.
Well, they were a double act. I mean, I'm not quite sure how many launches Pendolino had, but I think I went to all of them. But there was the famous one at Euston. I think it's the one that Blair was at, where Branson and Souter turned up in schoolboys' uniforms with short trousers and caps.
Oh, quite. I did. I mean, I must admit, I found all that a little bit kind of slightly cringy, but it was very effective. You know, it was very effective. Yeah.
Brian's sense of humour was legendary, wasn't it? He did this at several occasions. In fact, I saw him do it at Your Leaving Do.
He did.
So you know what I'm going to say.
I do.
He had a habit of writing a special set of words which were appropriate to the occasion for the teddy bear's picnic.
Yeah.
And he'd get up and he'd sing it a cappella on a stage, and it was always hysterical. The one at Your Leaving Do, there's one very famous pair of lines I'm not going to quote because they're probably actionable even now for the person concerned. But he certainly engaged, and he was very funny. He once apologised to me. I went to a Scottish dinner, and I was on the same table, and he came round and said, I won't attempt the accent. He said, Nigel, can I apologise before we start? I said, what do you want me an apology for, Brian? He said, it's in advance. He said, because in my speech, he said, you're going to hear all the jokes you did at the last Rail Awards last week. I said, I regard that as a compliment, Brian. Okay, let's carry on with a question from Joe Hosking, who says, given the increasing problem of homelessness, can the railway community in its widest sense be part of the solution? Numerous heritage railway carriages sit empty and unused, particularly throughout the colder winter months. Could these carriages provide short or longer term shelter for the homeless? Richard, what do you think?
Yes, I mean, I absolutely understand the sentiment of this. It's a really lovely idea, and we should always be looking for things we can do. I think logistically, that's a bit tricky. There's kind of safety issues in terms, because a lot of these things are stored on railway sites that aren't always completely dormant during the winter. They've got to be powered and heated. So that's, and obviously there's quite a significant cost. So I think as good an idea as it sounds at first, I think it's logistically quite challenging. However, there are things that the railway can and does do for homeless. And actually, because we obviously saw this question come through, did a little bit of research, and Steph's looked into some of this as well. And there's some terrific stuff actually that's done. So Network Rail, for instance, does an awful lot. At Birmingham New Street, they have a Christmas lunch on Christmas Eve for about 250 homeless people, which is brilliant. They've done that at Birmingham, I know, for a few years. They did actually have a very successful one at Euston a few years ago, with in conjunction with a charity called St Mungo's. Slightly tricky to do since, because of Euston's obviously been a huge building site. But they do the one at Birmingham. They do pop-up shops at London Bridge, at Victoria, at Waterloo for 3 days to mark World Homeless Day. They've raised a lot of money actually for homeless charities, which is fantastic. And so there's loads of stuff. Oh, I can see also they hosted Shelter's Walk for Home fundraising event at London Bridge last week, because the walk has started and ended there. That event has raised nearly £200,000 or something. So it's absolutely superb what is done, and I'm sure it's not just Network Rail, there's the train operators as well. There's always more we can do, but I think the carriage is one. I don't know if you agree or not. Logistically a bit difficult, I think, that one.
It is logistically difficult, and the big reason is they are not designed, other than sleeping cars, obviously, they are not designed to be lived and slept in.
That's a good point.
The heritage people get away with it to a degree because it's usually Mark 1s that are compartment stock.
Yeah.
So you can get two people laying out a sleeping bag in a compartment.
Yeah.
But it's not very easy in open stock with seats for 2+2. So they're just not designed for it. So I'm with you. And compartment stock's been used on heritage railways, but it's very difficult even for their own volunteers. So I think you're right. The best thing is to carry on with the Christmas lunches and the fundraising, so that we can help the people who do provide dormitory and sort of hostel accommodation to do more of it and do it better. The carriages is a great idea in principle, but once you actually start to think through it, I think it becomes very difficult.
Bit hard. Okay, moving on. Tony Jameson asked, jeepers, talk about questions that are going to get people go, well, I don't agree with that. Well, this is one of them. Which is the finest type of locomotive ever to run on Britain's railway?
Right, I'm going to start by a really nerdy but important point, which I was once corrected by none other than the great John Bellwood on this very point.
Okay.
People tend to use type and class interchangeably, and they are not the same.
They are not, you're right.
In steam locomotive terms, a type is defined by its wheel arrangement. So it's a 462, it's Pacific, it's a 460, or a 262, or else. That's a type. So a Pacific is a type, but you can get numerous different classes.
Yeah.
So just so we know that we're talking about the same sort of thing. I suppose.
Are you going to answer class then? Because I agree with you, right? Because we got on diesels, we got type 2, type 3, type 4, type 5. So are you going to go class then?
Well, yeah, we could do that, because if you look at the one of the finest type of diesel locomotive, there's probably a real argument for the 08, 10, 12, 060 shunter, which the LMS really introduced recognisably as it still is today in about 1932, and they owe us nothing. They just go on and on forever. In steam locomotive terms, we talked about Peter Townend. There's a book called British Pacific Locomotives by C.J. Allen, which I'd recommend anybody interested in this to read, because there's a section on the introduction of the A4 in 1935. And just indulge me for a minute, because this was spectacular. Gresley went to Germany, I think, in about March that year, and was very impressed by the Flying Hamburger streamlined diesel train.
Oh, yeah.
The LNER had no money. He couldn't afford to do that. So the LNER board in May 1935 authorised Gresley to build a new streamlined locomotive and train to go with it. So he built on the success of the A3, came up with the A4, and in 5 months, straight off the drawing board, produced Silver Link and the Silver Jubilee streamlined train with the beaver tail observation car. And this is the breathtaking bit. On September the 27th that year, it left King's Cross with a train full of journalists, untested, and went north. I think it did was it 25 miles at over 100 miles an hour? It did a 112 mile an hour speed record, which the LMS took a very dim view of and immediately started competing with. And it got back okay. And I think for the next month or thereabouts, it went to Newcastle every day with not a minute booked against it, because the next 3 in the quartet of silver A4s were not yet ready. And I think C.J. Allen said never in British locomotive history was there a more impressive introduction into service.
That went from, did you say, from drawing board to that inaugural run in 5 months?
And the train that went with it. Now, you could say it was a bigger A3 with a streamlined casing, but they were still operating at the cutting edge of the technology they had, and they did it in 5 months. And the train that went with it. But when you think of building trains and getting them even running now, and the amount of time it takes, but to have if you forgive the expression, to have the balls to go from King's Cross on the first run untested with a load of journalists on board and do 100 miles an hour for miles on end and set a record of 112, that's gutsy, isn't it? That is gutsy. And then, of course, the A4s went on with Mallard and the 126 mile an hour speed record. They revolutionised. They were the first high-speed train. They inaugurated high-speed intercity travel. When the class left the East Coast Main Line, they carried on in Scotland for a bit more. And the mystique and the hard work they did was just fantastic. So I reckon there's a real claim for the A4.
Okay, so my go. I don't remember steam. And so I don't feel... I enjoy going on Heritage Railways, don't get me wrong. But I don't feel quite the same, I suppose, connection, really, that others do. So slightly more modern. I like your shunter locomotive one. I think that is a very good shout. And I suppose I would probably go for something sort of similarly ubiquitous and it's just worked hard and kind of constantly reinvented itself. And now I'm about to offend so many people because, I'm president of the Class 40 Preservation Society, and I suspect everybody goes, he's going to have to say Class 40. Well, probably, I love Class 40s, right?
So do I.
But with my heart, probably a bit more than with my head. I mean, I love the noise. I love everything about them. I think they're absolutely fabulous, but they're probably slightly underpowered. And they were a bit, they were pilot scheme. And so they were flawed in so many ways. They're wonderful. But I think in terms of something you say, actually, that just worked, it would have to be Brush's Type 4, Class 47, which... You think over 500 built, and they just did everything. I mean, they were just every year there was kind of seemed to be a modification. They did something differently. I think that locomotive probably could be said to be the ubiquitous, go anywhere, do anything, a fantastic purchase by the railways. Really, I mean, absolutely superb.
They were, and you're right about the Class 40. It was a lot of fuss to go to for 2,000 horsepower, wasn't it? Big
breezy. Now we're on seriously thin ice now. Okay.
But, I do just remember steam. I was 11 when it went, and my grandparents lived in the Cliviger Gorge on the climb to Copy Pit, and that meant I did see the last of steam. just. But
Right.
what I did see was a lot of Class 25s on, and the biggest traffic on there was, of course, coal trains coming over from Healy Mills to the power stations to Whiteburk and Burnnays
Yeah.
and Padiham and Huncote. Then all the empties going back. And I remember seeing a triple-headed Class 25 slavering by with a load of empties one day.
With about 80 horsepower then, isn't it?
Well, that's right. But the Class 40s, I remember my nan, she used to love the trains, but she'd stand at a kitchen. I remember being completely nonplussed the day one went by with a brake tender propelled in front of it. And she said, what on earth can be in that wagon? There's no room for anything.
Do you know, well, the funny thing about being a kid growing up and when you're interested in railways, I mean, you spent your time in your region, in your area. You know, you rarely travelled. You know, we lived in the northwest, so for me it was all about going to Manchester or going to Preston.
Yeah,
and so I'm a northwest kid, so it was Class 25s and it was Class 40s and all the rest of it. And then you know, I did get to go to the Eastern Region. I did see Deltics, but they were still. I never saw them regularly.
And so exotic.
So exotic, yeah.
To us, they were. You and I used to see.
I remember one of the most dramatic things I ever saw was about an 11-year-old, though, on a school railway society trip, was standing on, I think it was Cardiff Central Station, and one of the Llanwern steel trains went through with a triple-headed Class 37. That was, I mean, literally the whole place shook. And I was just kind of gripped by it. You know, I'd never seen anything like it or heard anything like it. It was just amazing. So I suppose you go with what you remember, don't you?
It was primeval. I remember, again, a railway society trip, and we ended up on Grantham Station. And an up train went past non-stop with a Deltic, and it was a similar experience. You know, it was just unbelievable. But these were very exotic, weren't they? I mean, I was the same as you. I was brought up in Burnley, so the Deltics were exotic. The Western region with the Westerns and the warships, and it was.
See, I was too young for that. They'd really all gone in '76, hadn't they? So I do remember seeing a Western when we went on a family trip down to Cornwall. But I think I only ever saw the one, and it was because it was just a bit. I think if I'd been a little bit older, I might have been able to travel more. But yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Jenny Morley says, and I'll take this one if you like, Richard, I'll give one view and then you can give a view on modern traction. I've often watched large steam locomotives suffering from wheel slip and wondered why it occurs. Surely a locomotive weighing more than 150 tonnes should have enough weight where it matters to prevent wheel slip, providing it isn't overloaded. So why are large passenger engines so prone to wheel slip? Well, it's a very good question, and you're right. You look at a Pacific like Oliver Cromwell, a Flying Scotsman, and you think, well, why are the wheels spinning around when it tries to set off? Well, I have a picture to illustrate this, and take a look at this. Yes, there is a lot of weight on a steam locomotive, but you can see from this picture how little of it is actually sitting on the rail. And the bit of the wheel here you can see on the rail head is no bigger than a 5p piece, and that's called a contact patch. Now, all the power of the locomotive has to go down through that tiny patch on the driven wheels to move the train. Now, if you imagine a Formula One racing car, that has a lot of power to put down in a hurry, and it's got big, fat, soft, black rubber tyres that really grip. So when a train tries to set off, all it has to do is break the contact between the wheel and the rail, and the wheels will spin round. So if you've got some moisture about, that can make wheels slip. And of course, passenger engines have got large wheels for high-speed running, which means they're quite highly geared. So they're quite tricky to get going. A shunting locomotive, if you imagine, has usually got 6 wheels, and they're quite small ones. So they're low-geared, so they'll get going easily and accelerate very rapidly up to a low top speed. But there's another interesting aspect to this picture. There's a view somewhere, I think, among some people, that the railhead is flat and the wheel is flat, and you can see it isn't. The railhead is curved, it's convex, and the wheel is cone-shaped. Now, there's all sorts of other reasons for that. On wagons, it has a self-centering effect, and you can see the flange isn't actually touching the rail, and that is generally how it should be, so you've got minimum resistance. So with a minimum contact between the locomotive and the rail, it's very easy for the wheels to spin. And one final comment on this, I've never forgotten this when I was told it, that a big locomotive like Flying Scotsman has less in contact with the rail than an ice skater has in contact with the ice.
Is that right? That's
what I was told.
Gosh, that's a. And by the way, I really liked what you did there, because we've put a photo up, right? So now if you're listening on Spotify or Amazon or whatever, you're going, well, I can't see the photo. No, you'll have to watch the YouTube channel, you see. And then if you watch YouTube and subscribe to that, then you get to see all the photos and all the films. So,
there you go.
That was good. That was a good bit of marketing. That's great.
Thank you, Richard.
That's really interesting. Actually, the other thing that's interesting about, of course, the wheel, the reason for the conical nature of it, it actually allows it to go around curves, and then it just sort of run up the cone, and then deals with the fact that you don't have a differential on a train that allows one wheel to go further around a bend than the other. But there you go. And so there's the whole technology of wheels and rail and contact and flange is fascinating.
And it's why it's so dangerous when the wheel wears flat, and likewise the rail does as well, because they bite into each other, and you can get derailments very easily.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. And I didn't know about the ice skater. That's brilliant. Here's one from David Crossley. How would you enhance the customer experience on the West Highland Line? And he does qualify this. It says, there's inadequate rolling stock for the duration of the journey and the scenery. Frequency of service is poor. There's overcrowding. There are trees obscuring views. It should be so much better. And charter trains are so popular. Well, if anybody's listening who's never had the chance to go up on the West Highland Line, so whether it's up to Fort William and along to Mallaig, or just down to Oban, I say just down to Oban, they are absolutely extraordinary. They're breathtaking. I mean, those of us who've been privileged enough to travel around the world on trains, I still think those lines kind of have very little to equal them, and they are absolutely magnificent. I think slightly unfair in a way. I think there's quite a lot been done over the years, and we had Alex Hines on recently talking about putting the cycle train and extending platforms so we could do that and all the rest. So there's stuff that's being done. However, I think David does make an interesting point. I don't know if you've ever done the Glacier Express in Switzerland or something like that.
No, it's on my bucket list, Richard.
Well, it's. And I know there'll be somebody somewhere going, oh, yeah, but it's completely different. And it is different. I know it's different, right? Speeds are lower, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are gauging issues. I know. But I've always thought, could we do something in Scotland on the Highland Lines, particularly the West Highland Line, possibly the branch to Kyle of La Calche as well, I don't know, where, a bit like those observation cars, like the Glacier Express, which is all glass.
Yes.
The scenery is just breathtaking. And I know there's issues. It has to come out of Glasgow Queen Street, and it has to run with all the other local services. Well, okay. Well, in which case, tell you what, let's think out the box. Let's just run a normal service to somewhere like, I don't know, Dumbarton, where it starts to get very pretty as you kind of go up towards past Loch Lomond and then Crianlarich. So change at Dumbarton and then get this sort of scenic train from that point. I don't know. There's not that much traffic on the line. Come on. I just think something that allows you to see a lot more of what's going on would be really interesting. I know it's expensive. I know money's tight. But, a bit like we're talking with the sleeper, you're actually promoting Scotland, not just generating revenue through the railway. I think it'd be amazing, actually.
And it would be globally commercially attractive.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah. You look at the ones in the US that do this. They're fantastic as well. I think it's. I mean, look, we ScotRail do an awful lot that's right, and so ScotRail. Gosh,
we're not being critical of
not at all. But I think there is something here where I've often felt when I'm on that line, we're not showing it off to its best. So I think David's got a point.
And is there a role there for the private sector? Because if there is commercially attractive revenues to be had, then maybe that's part of it.
Could be.
Okie dokie. Now, here's a question, Richard. Oh, God, short question. Could be big answers. Has any politician ever made a really positive contribution to the railways?
That's a pause, wasn't it? Are you going to go first? Or do you want me to have a crack first?
That's a tumbleweed moment. Well, yes, of course there is. I mean, we talked about Alistair Darling recently, and although Alistair didn't get everything right, as we know, largely the 2004 Railways Act and all the rest of it, he was generally positive toward the railway. And by getting out of the way and letting you get on with your job, mostly at the SRA, I think that's a positive contribution. The other Secretary of State from the other side of the House, who was also there for about 4 years, was Patrick McLaughlin, who was just brilliant. Then there's politicians in all sorts of small ways. Tom Harris, for example, the Labour rail minister up until 2010, or no, Brown fired him shortly before, didn't he?
Yeah.
But Tom came up with the 610161 number for the BTP for people on trains who are in trouble and can call.
Oh, I didn't know. Is that right? I didn't know that. Right. There you go.
I know that because I once asked him what bit of his job was he most proud of, and he said that. He said his legacy, he's most proud of having come up with that idea because it's had a profound effect. If people are on trains and are in trouble or can spot some nefarious behaviour going on, can quietly alert the BTP.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. But there's I suppose you could come up with all sorts of politicians who've made decent contributions in specific areas, but I'm not quite sure that's what Henry Peters is asking.
No, I don't think it was. I wouldn't disagree with any of the ones you've mentioned. I also quite a soft spot for Kim Howell as well. When he was rail minister, he was rail minister with Alistair when Alistair was Secretary of State, and when I was at the SRA, Kim was always very positive and would give you air cover. I think that's the point, really. What you really want from your politicians is clarity of policy, right, where we want to get to, and then to appoint the right professional people to get on and do it, and then support them, but then empower them to get on and do it. Right? And I think that's the key.
Find the very best people you can, and then just get out of their way.
Well, you get out of the way. Yeah, maybe. I think they've still got to be held accountable, and I don't have a problem with that. Yeah. But policy is not a straightforward task. It's actually quite hard to set sort of clear policies, but you're right. Get the right people and then allow them to do the job. But other than that, I was just looking at Secretary of States of Transport. You mentioned the two there, and between those two, we had people like Theresa Villiers, Justin Greening, Douglas Alexander, Ruth Kelly. I mean, not being funny, but what? Yeah. Well, anyway,
Jeff Hoon.
Oh, Jeff Hoon. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, it's a tough gig, but it's a tough gig. Should we leave it at that?
Yeah.
Move on.
Kim Howells, when he was rail minister, he agreed to speak at one of our conferences. And so I introduced him, went back to the desk at the front of the hall and sat down, and I'm making some notes, and there's nothing happening. He's at the lectern, and I eventually looked over to the lectern. He was waiting for me to catch his eye, and then looked at the room and said, again, I'm not going to attempt the accent. He said, I've just read my speech, and he pulled it up in front of me and he just tore it in two and said, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. And I looked at the back of the room, and I shall never forget the look on the face of his two civil service minders who doubtless written his speech and wondering what the hell he was going to say.
I went once to Cardiff, actually, to I think it was an event to do with the Richard Trevithick 200 that time. And I went down with Kim on the train. And as we were sort of coming into sort of Cardiff, he said, where are you staying tonight? And I said, I don't know, some Premier Inn or something, Travel Lodge. He said, no, you're not doing that. Come and stay with us. So we went up to Pontypridd and
Treforest.
Absolutely. And I think we ended up at some Italian and of course everybody knew Kim and Kim knew everybody. And then we ended up back at his place with his wonderful family. I mean, they're absolutely lovely, playing pool till into the early hours. And the following morning, I mean, I have to say I had a slightly thick head. And we were sat in his little garden overlooking the railway there. He had I can't remember, he had his red box or something. He was doing paperwork. I was doing my best to sort of see through the fog. It was a good night. I mean, and he was just that was the kind of guy there was no ceremony, there was nothing. He liked people, and he was a really, well, he is, a fantastic guy and a seriously gifted painter. Have you seen his paintings?
No, not at all.
They are absolutely fantastic. They are really good. So yeah, great guy.
I liked him a lot, and he wasn't there long enough in that respect.
No, I would agree. Right, moving on. Sean Morris Armitage asks, why can't this is quite a long one, by the way, why can't the industry insist that you input the card number of a rail card prior to purchasing a ticket with the appropriate discount applied? Should this require the user to have an online account or not is a relatively simple setup, even if the user has to go to a staff station in order to achieve this. I think his point is, what he's worried about is that there's a risk of fraud. So if you buy the ticket online and then you don't necessarily have to put the card number in, there's a risk that you can, unless it's checked, then there's a risk that you could get a Railcard discounted ticket, but without actually ever having to evidence the Railcard. I think that was the point. It's a tricky one, isn't it? I think the answer comes back to there should be proper ticket checks, But I just wonder whether there is a point, really. I mean, you have to enter a discount code, a coupon code, I suppose, for certain things. Could we actually say you've got to input a code number? It's not. I've never really thought about it before, but it's got me thinking.
And this is anecdotal. I've used the East Coast a lot over the last 20-odd years. And just from hearing the ticket checks go on around me, I've always heard the train manager, the guard conductor say, "Can I see the rail card, please?"
Yeah, me too. And actually, that's actually a very good point. And now, and they do say also, certainly on East Midland Railways, which I use a lot, they say, and it does have to be the app. We won't accept a sort of a screenshot or a photo, copy or whatever. It's got to be the actual rail card or off the app, which I suppose is one way of limiting the chance of fraudulent use.
Okay, right. Let's go on to Emily Streeter, who asks a bit of a well-known one, but it's a good question. Why are leaves on the line such a problem? Excuse me. They never used to be. All right, let me kick this one off. No, they didn't. And that was largely because Mark I carriages and older trains, the brakes were cast iron brake blocks, which actually squeezed the wheel tread that we saw in that last picture, for those of you watching on YouTube. Squeeze the wheel tread, and the cast iron blocks were softer than the steel of the wheel, so the brake blocks wore away, not the wheel. But a byproduct of that was that they scrubbed the wheel clean. Nothing stuck to the wheel tread after a brake application on a train with traditional brakes. Now, of course, trains have got disc brakes behind the wheel, and the wheel tread never gets that real scrubbing and cleaning. So that is part of the problem. Overhanging trees are much more common than they were since the steam days, when embankments and cuttings were kept clear because of fire risk. To save money, that stopped, and we'd only to see that Salisbury crash last year, and pictures of that tunnel where the train slid along the line, now all overhung with trees, whereas in the past it wasn't. So when leaves get on the line, they get crushed by the wheels into a slimy mess, which turns into a very shiny black lacquer. And non-railway people might find it hard to believe, but the whole train, just like your car, if you brake too hard, will slide. And it must be a terrifying feeling for a driver to apply the brake and not only not slow down, but go faster. And so they are a big problem for safety purposes. So when they are on the line, they don't get cleaned off the wheels by modern brakes. And they have to run a lot slower because they can't accelerate or decelerate as quickly as they otherwise can, just like your car on slippy roads.
Did the steam of steam trains cause the vegetation to be sort of almost like not grow as effectively? Or was that a bit of an urban myth?
I don't think so, Richard. Because you did see in the old days, you saw guys with scythes up and down the cutting banks and things, keeping them back. And if you look at all the trees that cause the problem today, they all date from the 1970s after they'd stopped cutting banks back when steam went.
And this whole vegetation control thing is a big deal, isn't it? I mean, I've seen pictures of our local former railway line here, the one through Monsell Dale. And you look at it, pictures of it in the 40s and the 50s, and there's nothing near the rail line. And I saw that picture of Salisbury, which is absolutely unbelievable. You see it sort of 10 years ago and now, or whatever, and it's just incredible. And I know there's probably a few ecologists who'll get very upset about this, but I'm really sorry. The railway line is not there to have overhanging vegetation. It absolutely should be cut right back. That's not going to diminish that much in terms of habitat, but there is nothing more operationally disruptive than leaves on the line, and as you rightly say, sort of terrifying for a driver that suddenly finds themselves sort of sliding on what's the railway equivalent of black ice.
I mean, I have driven a steam locomotive with no train on it, which on slippery, icy rails, I put the brakes on and nothing happened, and it just went faster. And it was terrifying. The idea of doing that with 300 people behind you is just a point. And, of course, the signal sighting issues. And how every winter, every storm, how much disruption is caused by trees collapsing across the railway. I've got a really uncompromising view on this. There should be no trees between the line side fences. Between the boundary fences.
Look, I'm with you. But there'll be plenty that aren't. But I'm afraid, we don't agree. We think that's kind of how it is. That's what we're like on green signals, isn't it? Sometimes we can say, we just don't agree. Right?
We just don't agree. No. This is what we think, and if you don't like it, well, tough.
Yeah, there you go. Right, last question. I like this one. This is really good. This is from Martin Smith. Which railway figure do you wish you had had a chance to work with or work for?
Right, there's a number of obvious ones. Your knee-jerks, the William Stanyers, the Nigel Gresleys, and all those sort of figures. But for me, and I think this might strike a chord with you, it would be Sir Peter Parker, who fascinates me. And I had the very great good fortune to meet briefly, and he taught me a real lesson. It was when I was working on the Windermere steamers in one of the 3 summer vacations I did as a student, and he visited because they were sea-linked then. And the captain of the particular boat I was on hated students, so he didn't like me because students didn't pay tax. And Parker was, that was all it was about. That's all it was about. And he made my life a bloody misery, did this bloke. I won't name him. Anyway, we heard that Parker was.
Go on.
No, he might not be dead yet. Anyway, I think there was a crew of 5 on that boat, and I was there over several weeks on this in a T-bar on the back, fabricated steel box on the back. And this skipper said to me, we got to Lakeside, and he had them all lined up, and he says, "You can stay in your T-bar. You're only temporary. You don't need to meet Parker." Fair enough. So I was at the back. Now, and it's a long boat. It was a Swift, so it was 20 metres to where they were all lined up. And Parker got on, and he went down the line shaking hands, and I saw him look down the boat a couple of times at where I was and say something. And the skipper started to speak, and I remember Parker's put his hand up to stop this bloke, turned on his heel and walked the full length of the boat, and said to me, "I've just come down here to shake your hand. I understand your duties prevented you coming up there to meet me up there." He said, "So I just wanted to come and say thank you for what you're doing. I'm sure it gets a bit tedious in there, but it all counts." And he walked straight back and got off the boat, and he saw in an instant what had happened and wasn't putting up with it.
Do you know, just to prove to absolutely everybody listening that this is not a scripted program at all. So the person I would most like to have worked with or for is Sir Peter Parker, right? And I'm going to have to, because I agree, there was something about him. He wasn't of the railway. He wasn't, he came from, I can't remember where he'd been before. Somebody will no doubt remember. But he came in, was 75, 76, something like that. Unusual, of course, because he was appointed by a Labour minister and then stayed on when after the Conservatives won the election in 79. So it was quite unusual in that regard. But he was the kind of that first guy. He was unbelievably positive. He was relentlessly positive, right? And And he had that glorious way. I mean, I didn't know him at the time because, I was a kid, but he seemed to have that incredible way of connecting with everybody. And it didn't matter. Your story on the boats is great because it didn't matter whether you were the, sort of regional operations manager of something, of somewhere or other, or you were basically, the cleaner on the platform. He didn't care. He could connect with anybody. And my Parker story is when I just become chairman of the Strategic Rail Authority. He was still alive at the time. And he was a bit of a hero. You know what they say, never meet your heroes, just in case. Well, I thought, what the heck? So I wrote to him, I think I called him. And anyway, his PA rang me up and said, Sir Peter would love to meet. He suggests having breakfast. I mean, suggesting means this is what's going to happen, right? At the Savoy, which I gathered he kind of possibly even had shares in because he did everything at the Savoy. Anyway, we had breakfast at the Savoy. And I thought I might get half an hour or something. Well, I think we had about 2 hours in total. And he started off by saying, "Oh, dear boy," he said, I really don't think anything that I went through then will be remotely relevant to what you're going through now with your privatised railway and all the rest of it. And we didn't really talk much about detail, but we did talk about politicians and politics and the relationship between the railway and the government. And what became increasingly obvious was actually nothing had changed, really, in those 30 years, or whatever it was, 40 years. And he was absolutely extraordinary. And he died shortly after. It was only a few months after. And I remember just feeling, and still do now, feeling extraordinarily privileged, like you, to have met the guy. He was remarkable. So I would love to have worked with him. And there are plenty of others, aren't there, that are fantastic, absolutely superb. But there was just something about him that was just, he was different. And he was positive, and he just sold the railway. He was
relentless.
Yeah, so and fantastic.
Wasn't he the one who came up with the crumbling edge equality?
I believe so. Yeah,
and the year of the clean window.
Yeah,
that experience that I had. I'll tell you another very brief story about one of his successors, who again I better not name, I suppose. I met him once at. After a press conference during an industrial dispute. And I hadn't been on rail that long, so you can probably work out who it was. And I waited at the back of the room till the party went out and doorstepped him effectively and sort of proffered a card as he walked towards me and said, "Look, excuse me, can I just have 10 seconds of your time? I'm Nigel Harris, editor of Rail magazine." And that's as far as I got. He literally put his hand like that on the end of my nose, completely ignored me and just walked by. And it couldn't have been different to the Parker experience, who in an instant realised there was something going on that he didn't like and tackled it.
That's very sad. But
so there you go. And that's the end of our questions.
It is. It is.
It's flown by. I actually really enjoyed that. I was a bit apprehensive about it. We tripped up over each other a couple of times, but it just shows it's not too scripted and everything else. How did you find it?
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I mean, there were some great questions there, actually. And what I love about some of those questions is that probably about 80% of the people listening think we've got it absolutely completely wrong because they'd have had a different person or a different politician or a different locomotive, whatever. That's just the fun of it, isn't it, really? There's no right or wrong answer. Well, apart from ours, obviously. That's railways and railway people all over.
It
certainly is.
Isn't it? I think you'll find, and then off. I think you'll find, and off we launch.
Indeed.
But look, we definitely should do that again sometime. Maybe
definitely
drop a few in on some of the regular episodes. I don't know. We'll have a listen. But look, to all you people listening and watching out there. Thanks ever so much for listening and watching. The bad news is that this is the last episode for season 1. The good news is we're having just 1 week off to enjoy a slice of turkey, and if they're your thing, a sprout. They're not mine, so I won't.
Dear, what?
I hate sprouts.
Oh, I love them.
Absolutely hate sprouts.
Oh, flipping it. This is way more serious than what's the best locomotive and have politicians ever done anything for the railways. I'm sorry. That's unacceptable. That
Can we not be friends anymore?
It's touch and go. You certainly would go hungry in our house on Christmas Day, I can tell you.
No, I can't be doing with sprouts. I can't be doing with sprouts at all. So what you got planned for Christmas then, Richard?
Well, apart from sprouts.
Yeah, well, it's clear.
Well, apart from sprouts and moving house, partly because of the moving house thing, it's going to be relatively quiet, I hope. But no, we're staying at home, and then the kids are actually all off. Most of them are off actually in the new year, sort of skiing and stuff. So we'll probably just sort of, sag a bit.
Yep. Likewise, I'm planning, expecting a pretty quiet time. I've got one invitation to Christmas lunch, which I'm very seriously considering. And we'll see how that goes. A few discussions to be had, but we're on the way.
Excellent.
So, look, we really had no idea how this would go, but it's been an absolute blast. And Richard and I clearly hope you've enjoyed watching and listening to us blathering on about locomotives and managers and all the rest of it. We're really looking forward to 2024, having got green signals established with your support, and we're incredibly grateful for that. And the start of season 2, we've lots planned. We do hope that you'll stay with us and contribute and be part of the Green Signalers team. But for now, have a very happy, relaxing Christmas with you and your loved ones, or however you're going to spend Christmas, walking or cycling or whatever you're going to do. Enjoy it, and here's to a happy, healthy, and a very prosperous new year. So it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.